Right, it dissolves. It kind of, I think of the stomach as kind of a rock tumbler. It's like moving things around, squirt some acid on it, right, and try to break it down. So it has to make it through the stomach, but that's not where the drug gets absorbed, right? I always thought in the stomach is where, this is dumb, I know, I probably shouldn't admit it, but I thought that's where you actually absorbed nutrients and drugs. No, where do you do that? Where does it go next? Small intestine. And the small intestine is designed, or it has been evolved to be a great place for absorption to occur. Why? What are some of the features of the small intestine? Huh? The cilia, yeah, that moves stuff around. That, what else? What about all the surface area? Lots of crooks and crannies and lots of places for things to be absorbed. Surface area is a big determinant of absorption, right? You have to have lots of spots for it to get absorbed. So the small intestine is where the drugs and most of your nutrients are absorbed, right? And so what if the drug, but in order for it to be absorbed, it's got to make it through that barrier from the gut lumen into the gut wall, doesn't it? What do you think will allow that drug to move from the gut lumen into the gut wall? It's just passive diffusion. Just passive diffusion. So in order for a drug to passively diffuse through that membrane, what is it? What are the qualities of passive diffusion? What, first of all, what powers passive? Remember, passive means no energy is needed. What powers passive diffusion? Concentration gradient, right? Concentration gradient. So you have a much higher concentration in the lumen than you do in the gut wall. So it's going to automatically try to equilibrate those two things, right? So passive diffusion is fueled by that concentration gradient. Does everybody buy that? And in order for it to actually pass, what physical characteristics does it have to have? Well, it has to pass through this lipophilic membrane. So do you think that the drug needs to be more lipophilic or hydrophilic? Lipophilic, likes like, doesn't it? So it wants to have, so it has to be lipophilic enough to pass through that membrane. What else? Does it like a charge? No, it has to be unionized, doesn't it? Right? What else? It has to be small enough, right? So it has to be broken down to be small enough. It has to be small enough. It has to be lipophilic enough. It has to be uncharged, right? And there has to be a concentration gradient. Am I missing anything? Trying a new coffee. Josh Allen coffee. JA17 blend. I don't know if I should be going to Josh Allen for my coffee. Anyway, okay. So back to passive diffusion. So is everybody good with that? So there's lots of stuff that can happen that we'll talk about in a minute that can happen in the gut that stops that drug from being absorbed. But remember, it's for the most part, there's some rare exceptions, but for the most part, that absorption phase is just passive diffusion. Small enough, lipophilic enough, uncharged enough, and a concentration gradient. Okay? So our first Ninja Warrior step is to get through that gut wall, into the gut wall. And guess what? In the gut wall, which is new information actually, we are fairly new. I shouldn't say that new, it's really not that new. In the last 100 years new. God bless you. We found that gut wall has two things waiting for that drug ready to try to break down or change that drug or get rid of that drug. The first thing is called P-glycoprotein. P-glycoprotein is an exocrine pump. It's waiting in the wall of the gut wall to take that drug that's now been absorbed and spit it back out into the gut lumen. I call it the bouncer of the body. It's like, yeah, but no. You're back out in the lumen. So it's an active exocrine pump that moves drug from the gut wall back out into the gut lumen. Interesting, right? This was discovered when researchers were studying cancer drugs, and they were watching as they put the drug into the slide with cancer cells, and they saw the drug being taken up into the cancer cell and then spit back out again. And they're like, well, no wonder the drug can't work. The cell is spitting the drug back out. That's because there's P-glycoprotein on the wall of the cancer cell. They're like, what? And guess what? Now, again, if you were, let's play God for a moment. You're in charge of designing a human being. Do you think it's a good idea to be putting these exocrine pumps in the gut wall? Chamaka thinks yes. Who's on team Chamaka? Why do you think so, Chamaka? Yeah. It's going to stop it from bringing it into the bloodstream, isn't it? And that's a good thing, right? Because you're possibly protecting your bloodstream from getting a toxin in it, right? So you can see why this is a really smart thing, yeah? So if you are dumb and eat the wrong berry, or you have one more line of defense that's going to say, nope, you're not getting into the systemic circulation. Now, what we found about P-glycoprotein is that there's some drugs that are substrates. You know what a substrate is? Some drugs that act as substrates, and not all of them do, but some are P-glycoprotein substrates, some aren't. Drugs, and it's also a protein, so you can have competition for that P-glycoprotein, right? So you can have drug interactions that occur because of P-glycoprotein. You can have things that upregulate and downregulate P-glycoprotein. So it's a source for a whole bunch of drug interactions, isn't it? But if you have something that increases your P-glycoprotein and the drug is a substrate for P-glycoprotein, what's going to happen? Well, a lot of it's going to be spit back out into the gut lumen and is not going to get absorbed. So your bioavailability is going to go down. You like it? Interesting. All right, so we have P-glycoprotein. I told you there was another thing. We have P-glycoprotein. Oh, one more thing. Where else, if you were in charge, if you were God and designing a human, where else would you put P-glycoprotein? It's found all over the body, but where's another place that you would put it? What do you want to protect? How about along your blood-brain barrier? There's a lot of P-glycoprotein along the blood-brain barrier to protect your central nervous system, right? And it's found all over the place. But anyway, so we have P-glycoprotein. We also have in your gut wall enzymes, metabolic enzymes that will break, the same enzymes that are in the liver are found in the gut wall that will break down drug. Smart too, right? So again, you can have enzymes upregulated, downregulated. You could be genetically predisposed to have more of the enzyme or less of the enzyme that might break down the drug. There's competition. Again, an enzyme is a protein. There's competition for those enzymes. So there's drug-drug interactions. It's all so exciting, right? So you have those two things in your gut wall. Okay, so let's say your drug is absorbed because it's small enough, there's a concentration gradient, it's unionized, and it's lipophilic enough that it makes it through into the gut wall. Let's say it does not get spit back out by P-glycoprotein and it is not a substrate for those enzymes. Where does the drug go next? What did you learn in physiology about blood flow from the small intestine? Where does it go? It does. It goes to the liver. Who said that? Bravo. A for you on 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 your physiology and anatomy, because the drug, then all that blood flow goes into the portal system and goes to the liver next. What do you think about that design? It's good. Why? What's in the liver? Whole bunch of enzymes ready to it's the major metabolic organ of the body, right? So it's going to metabolize drugs. Again, possibly breaking that drug down before it can get to the systemic circulation. So that's the final hoop, the final ninja test, is to make it through the liver without being metabolized. Okay? So do you have a picture? Now we're going to talk about a little more detail about all those, but I wanted you to have that general picture. So it has to get absorbed, has to make it through the gut wall, and then it has to make it through the liver before it makes it to the systemic circulation. All right. Let me know if you want to help me next VIP 2-day, because we go through all those different barriers, don't we, Bo? All right. So bioavailability. We're now going to go back and review this. I wanted to give you that overview picture. Okay. So the fraction of a drug given that reaches the systemic circulation is your bioavailability. Remember, we multiply our dose rate, or our dose times bioavailability, in order to determine the amount of drug that's going to actually make it to the systemic circulation. So that's always our drug in. We have to always think about bioavailability when we're thinking about drug in. If you want your patient, now this is something you'll be asked to do a lot if you practice pharmacy, especially in a hospital. If you want your patient to get the same amount of drug in the systemic circulation, you have to set your what's going to actually make it into the systemic circulation equal to each other. So bioavailability of your formulation 1 times the dose rate that you're going to give of that first formulation is equal to the bioavailability of your second formulation. You got to set those equal in order to get equivalent amounts into the systemic circulation, right? So if you want to change formulations, what I do is just put this in an equation like this. God bless you, or no, that's not a God bless you. That sounds sick. Are you okay? You good? Yeah. So bioavailability of first formulation times the dose rate of your first formulation. And then you'd put your formulation for your second, the bioavailability of your second, and solve for your new dose rate to keep those equivalent. Okay, so that's the equation you need. So there's lots of different chemical forms. And I think I told you that we also have to consider salt forms or ester forms. So salt or ester of the drug, we symbolize with a big letter S. The salt is the fraction of the administered dose that is the active drug. So if we say we're giving a hydrochloride salt of propranolol, for example, and I told you that the salt form was equal to 0.85, that would say that 85% of that propranolol hydrochloride is the active drug. 15% of it's going to be immediately go away. It'll dissociate as soon as it hits water, right? So as soon as that salt hits water, it's going to dissociate. So the salt form is the percentage of the administered dose that is the active compound. Does that make sense to everybody? So for example, sodium phenytoin is 92% phenytoin. So therefore S is equal to 0.92. And you'd always have to multiply that times the dose. So if we're giving 100 milligrams of sodium phenytoin, only 92 milligrams, why does that say 100? This should say 0.92. Only 92 milligrams is going to be active, right? So the drug that reaches the systemic circulation is bioavailability times salt form times dose, or times dose rate, whatever you're looking at. So you have to consider not only bioavailability, but salt form. Salt form is just what it is, though. It's not really affected by any physiological systems. So as we talked about the journey, drugs must go from the GI lumen through the gut wall to the liver to the systemic circulation. So there's actually 3 different components to bioavailability. We can break bioavailability into fraction absorbed, which is going from the gut lumen, and what percentage of that is absorbed. and then what percentage of it makes it through the gut wall, and then what percentage of it makes it through the liver. Okay, so we have FA, FG, and FH. You multiply all those together to get your overall bioavailability. Is everybody good with that? So fraction that's absorbed in the gut wall, fraction that escapes gut wall metabolism, and the fraction that escapes liver metabolism. So these are all the fractions that make it. So what determines FA? FA is, remember we talked about, is passive diffusion. Follows the laws of passive diffusion. There has to be a concentration gradient because that's what powers it. Has to be unionized, has to be lipid soluble, and has to be small enough. So what can decrease the fraction absorbed? Not sure why I have a picture of a soccer player here, but maybe they're fighting for the ball. I don't know. So what can decrease fraction absorbed? It can be destroyed by acid in the stomach. There also could be digestive, metabolic, or microfloral enzymes in the intestine that break down the drug before it can get absorbed. It can also undergo complexation. Complexation is when the drug binds to something like calcium, for example. If it binds to calcium or other divalent cations like magnesium, it can bind to that, and then it's too big to get absorbed, and it just goes out in the poo. Those are a couple of examples of what can happen to drug so that it doesn't get absorbed. What about FG? FG is the gut wall, and we've already talked about the fact that there's CYP P450 enzymes in the intestines, in the gut, I should say, in the gut wall is a better way to visualize it. In the gut wall, there's also P-glycoprotein, which is our bouncer, right? So this kind of shows what's happening here. So we have, so if it gets absorbed from the gut into here, we have P-glycoprotein, which is what these circles are, spitting it back in. We also have enzymes waiting to metabolize the drug. So it's got to make it by these efflux pumps and make it by the enzymes in order to make it through into the portal system. And then it's going to go to the liver where we have all these enzymes waiting again for it to make it through. And we don't have the systemic circulation, but eventually it goes out into the systemic circulation. Can also get eliminated in the bile, which we're not going to talk about right now. So there's all these things that can happen to the drug. So FH, which is the fraction that escapes the metabolism in the liver, is called the first pass effect. To escape the first pass effect, the first pass effect is the idea, and because this we knew about a long time ago, that there were drugs that were metabolized by the liver before it even got to make it to the systemic circulation. So that first pass through the body, the drug is eliminated as it goes through the liver, and it's eliminated before it can even get to the systemic circulation. That's what the first pass is. Does everybody make sense? Because I will use the word first pass. So blood from the intestines is routed through the portal vein to the liver before reaching the systemic circulation. So the first pass effect is that metabolism by the liver following absorption. And it can significantly decrease the amount of drug that reaches its destination. This is the biggest reason that we have to give some drugs IV or by other routes. Like nitroglycerin, we don't give nitroglycerin orally because it has a very large first pass effect. So how do we give nitroglycerin? Under the tongue, because that avoids the liver. Or we give nitroglycerin IV by patches, right? Different ways that are not oral. Or again, if you work in hospitals, you might notice that the doses of some oral drugs are much greater than the IV doses that we give. So anybody work in a hospital? So what is the usual dose of verapamil IV? 5, 10, 20 milligrams, right? What is it orally? 200, right? Something, right? So what do you think is going on there? That first pass effect, right, is eliminating the drug as it goes through the liver. So you have to give a lot more of it orally to get the same percentage to make it through to get to the systemic circulation to have an equivalent effect. Well, you're looking at me weird. You okay? You're just thinking. You're tired. Why are you tired? Not getting enough rest. All right. I know I was constantly tired when I was in college. Constantly tired. That's why we drink a lot of coffee. All right. So you have an idea of what the first pass effect is. All right. I think we've done that. All right. So here's some examples. So tacrolimus, does anybody know what that drug is? It's an anti-rejection drug that we use when we have transplants. The fraction that makes it through that to be absorbed is 100%. 100% of it makes it to be absorbed. But look at this. Only 14% makes it by the enzymes and the P-glycoprotein, because this is a substrate for the enzymes and the P-glycoprotein that are in the gut wall. So if we give 100 milligrams, which is not a dose we give, but I'm just making it easy. Well, 100 milligrams will make it to be absorbed, but now we're down to 14 milligrams already, right? After we get through the gut. Then it has to go through the liver, and about 96% of that makes it through. So what's 1 times 4 times, so 0.14 times 0.9. So bioavailability is 0.134, right? The absorption is not the problem. The first pass effect through the liver isn't the problem. The problem is the gut wall, what's happening in the gut wall with this one, right? How about atorvastatin? What's atorvastatin? Does anybody know? It's a lipid lowering drug, right? So again, 100% of it's absorbed. Oops, only 24% makes it through the gut wall, and only 58% of that makes it through the first pass. So what's the bioavailability of atorvastatin? .139, so about 14%. Okay, so we can go through here and see, and you can see quinidine and alprazolam, all of these are pretty high. But when you multiply them together, you know, you get down to 70% or so, right? So you have to, here's our, both of these are very low phenolidipine, very little of that makes it through, right? So it's got both a big gut and a, so it's only 15. All right, you get the idea. Now, when these are very low, like this, you have the potential of, if this changes, it's going to make a huge difference in your bioavailability, isn't it? It could increase the bioavailability significantly. All right, so what determines the first pass effect? Well, the first pass effect, I'm not going to get into this too much, but I'm going to go straight down here, is determined by these 3 things. Q is your liver blood flow. Intrinsic clearance is your enzyme activity in the liver. And fraction unbound is just what you might expect. fraction, unbound, not bound to plasma proteins. We get to say FU a lot in this class, but we don't mean that. We mean fraction unbound. So what determines if a drug is going to be eliminated? Enzyme activity, liver blood flow, and your fraction unbound. I'm not going to go through this now. It's a little too much. Okay, we'll talk about this. We'll come back to this when we talk about liver clearance, because it's really the same, very similar to liver clearance, isn't it? So tomorrow we're going to go through the workshop on bioavailability. All right, and so then we'll be done with bioequivalence and bioavailability. All right, your homework is due Thursday, I think, and we'll do the workshop tomorrow. We'll have a quiz on Monday on this. All right, sound good? Thank you all.